and welcome to the Debrief. This is Carolina Journal's weekly recap of everything happening in politics and public policy. Make sure you like and subscribe because we bring you a lot of information each week, and here in 2024, big election year, you're going to need some of that information. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. Joining us this week, of course, Jeff Moore, the deputy editor of CJ. We're going to be talking a lot about what's going on in party politics this week. And then, of course, joining us, we have Teresa Opeka, who is covering the executive branch for Carolina Journal, and Katie Zender, just joining our Carolina Journal team. She's going to be covering a lot of the General Assembly and a lot of what's happening in North Carolina. So we're going to be really paying attention close to this. Let's kick this off. This week, NCGOP Chairman Michael Whatley, it looks like he might be getting kicked upstairs up to the big leagues. What are we hearing?
Yeah, so there was news that broke last week that former President Donald Trump actually made the ask of current RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel that they move on to new leadership, and Chairman Whatley was the one pointed to as his recommendation. Now, full disclosure, I worked for Chairman Whatley, and I did some time there at the North Carolina Republican Party, and I think it really speaks to this news. It looks like that it was confirmed by the Trump camp last night that was their official recommendation.
Okay.
And I think it speaks to kind of some credit to the Republican successes in North Carolina. Chairman Whatley's leadership with the North Carolina Republican Party, but really North Carolina as a microcosm of the nation, because if that's the leadership you're pulling up to the national stage, it just is a testament to all of the issues that cross through here in North Carolina.
Sure. So you've had a lot of personal experience with Chairman Whatley.
Yeah.
Hard worker. Tell me what you think about his influence and what this may be saying for Ronna McDaniel. We're hearing a lot about this as we travel around and really look at what's going to happen in 2024. Was she just not in the right seat at the right time?
Yeah, and as you go through these leadership roles, and especially with an organization as big and as varied as the RNC, you have Republicans across the 50 states, and a California Republican is going to be very different than a North Carolina Republican. So you have different factions and dissatisfaction that happen with leadership. So you've had that happen with Ronna McDaniel. You had the 2022 elections, which nationwide weren't quite the red wave that they were looking for, but here in North Carolina, we had big breakers here in North Carolina. The Republicans did very well under the leadership of Chairman Michael Whatley. And so I think they see that example as an outlier of success when they had a disappointing year otherwise, and they pull that success up for a national stage. And his work ethic, and he's relentless at actually tackling the position of chairman for the North Carolina Republican Party, and I expect nothing less for his role with the RNC if that comes to fruition.
Sure. So now that you're a little more removed from the party politics, getting into the policy here with us, do you think that sets them up for the Trump's controlling the party and this is going to be a split and all these other things? Tell me what your thoughts are about what it means for primary voters and any fuel it might give Democrats.
Yeah, well, I think as far as Whatley's leadership moving in would be a really professional operation.
Okay.
I think the North Carolina Republican Party came to be known nationally and by the RNC as a very well-run organization with professional staff, mature approach to the campaign cycle, and a really thorough examination of everything they need to put in place to have success at the ballot box.
Sure.
So I think you're going to see a lot of that operations nuts and bolts coming up to the leadership level with Whatley if he's able actually placed there and voted in. And so yeah, I think you have a little bit of a refresh. You have experience so where you can actually have the organization, but you've got the confidence of that Trump wing of the party that wants to see more success nationwide at the ballot box after maybe coming up short in 2022.
Sure, very interesting. Teresa, tell me your thoughts. You cover Governor Cooper a lot. He is very influential in national Democrat politics. How do you see this shaking out for 2024 with him?
He's got to be obviously on the defensive when it comes to this, and I think, with the recent gaffes with Joe Biden and also the damning report that came out about him being an old, feeble man, bad memory, well-meaning man, but, Democrats are going to be scrounging, looking for whatever they can. So at this point, yeah, I mean, I think North Carolina has been a pivotal player, but even more so if Chairman Whatley gets in.
Sure, and they'll really be looking to people like Governor Cooper.
Oh, absolutely.
To be a voice.
Yeah,
for that.
I think he's trying to get in on the national stage too. You see him talking on all the different talk shows about what a wonderful job he's done for the state,
right?
And talking to different people in White House leadership. So I mean, keep an eye and Cooper
Yeah.
to go up a little bit further when he gets out of office
Very
later this year.
interesting. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts, Katie?
Right. So yeah, I think Governor Cooper will definitely be on the defensive when it comes to this aspect. But
Sure.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, we'll be watching that really closely. Actually, given 2024 is such a big election year,
Yeah.
one of the things I've been hearing, because we all travel around a lot, talk to our readers at Carolina Journal, I get asked a lot about foreign-owned land in North Carolina. This is kind of an undercurrent issue that's really something that's important to primary voters, maybe voters who are outside of our urban areas. You did some research on this. I'm really curious to hear what you found out.
Right. So in 2023, the Congressional Research Service released their report that indicated that 3.5% of U.S. agricultural land in North Carolina is foreign owned.
Okay.
So that's about upwards of 700,000 acres of land. Now this is relevant because in January the GAO released their report critiquing the USDA for how they track and collect foreign owned land in the U.S. So
Is it not tracked? Do you think it's not tracked well? Is that the accusation, that they're not keeping track of how much is foreign owned?
So the GAO is saying that they're not updating this enough and they're not giving the government agencies enough information.
Oh, interesting.
And this is a problem because the DoD uses this information to assess potential national security risks.
Oh, that especially for a place like North Carolina, we have so many military bases.
Right.
Oh, very interesting.
Yes.
Is this something you've been paying attention? Seems like this might be up your alley.
Yeah. We've got a lot of sensitive military sites in North Carolina, and you've had an active Republican majority in the legislature actually do some proactive things to pass legislation to guard against having foreign-owned land in proximity to our military installations.
Sure.
But the reporting, I believe, from Katie's reporting, it looks like that there's some reliance on self-reporting for the information to actually get into the database. So some of these transactions can take place, and if they don't take the proactive step themselves to say, I'm a foreign national and I've bought this piece of real estate, then those things may be falling through the gap. And with so many sensitive sites, not just with the military, but around commercial interests as well. We have the RTP, a lot of biotech interests and intellectual property there. You've got to wonder if self-reporting is the way that needs to be done.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jeff. And there's no way to really enforce non-citizens to be able to report their foreign investments.
Right.
So it's kind of a bad system for collecting this information. So they can report it or they can not report it. But if they don't report it, then there's really no way to, know if they're reporting it.
Very interesting. Wow. Are there any suggestions about how to improve the situation? Have they come up with any plans?
Yeah. So the GAO did go into this in some of their report in more detail. Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's so many different things at play, especially for national security, for security here with all our different military bases and just keeping an eye on that. So, I mean, it's a very important topic.
Sure. What are the concerns? What could go wrong?
I mean, so many things could go wrong, national security-wise. In fact, I reported on this a couple months ago, but not only is land foreign-owned, but there are companies that are foreign-owned. So a potential ICF facility in Greensboro, which is a site that's used for unaccompanied minors, is owned by a Chinese company.
Very interesting. All right, we'll be following that really closely. Speaking of which, we talked a little bit about North Carolina Ag Leagues. You have a great article right now on CarolinaJournal.com mapping out the future for agriculture in North Carolina. Still our biggest industry, right?
It is. It's the number one industry in agribusiness, over $100 million.
Sure.
It is.
Sure. What'd you find out?
So, yeah, they said, Golden Leaf had their own meeting about a year or so ago. It's another foundation here in North Carolina, that there wasn't a roadmap, so to speak, and not a strategic initiative to plan for agriculture's future in the state. So they want to get that lined up to, they had some meetings, and they partnered with the NC Chamber and also can have a group of stakeholders on a steering committee.
Right.
So what's going to happen is the Chamber is tasked with being the management company or management aspect of this. And they're going to have roundtables with farmers, small farmer like a family farm, all the way up to someone maybe produces soybeans, cotton, get all their different perspectives, see what's working, see what's not working, hold all those through the end of the year. They're calling that the discernment phase.
Okay.
When that gets through, then they're going to talk about what worked for people, come back with that, and come in early 2025, where they'll have this roadmap strategic initiative planned out. Because it's so important. I did talk to State Ag Commissioner Steve Troxler. He said, with so many people moving into North Carolina, it's important to prepare for this because there's so much acreage being lost with people moving in, new developments coming in, planning where you're going to get the water from people coming in. Also, there was a startling statistic of solar taking away so much acreage too. So it's just getting ready and getting prepared. And as Ray Starling from the Chamber says, being able to feed the people coming here.
Sure.
That's the number one initiative, is to take care of the people who live here, feed them, and treat them well. And yeah, I think it's a great idea.
It is interesting. Tell me again about the solar piece of this.
Yeah, so it's based on wattage.
Okay.
It's not 100% determined, but they looked at the square footage based on wattage used.
Okay.
I believe it's 40,000 acres, I believe, it's in that there's thousands and thousands of acres being lost to solar right now.
Very interesting. You did a story similar on that about the at-risk farmland.
Right. So there's a lot of farmland at risk in North Carolina. Steve Troxler talked about this during his State of Agriculture address. Goldleaf was actually there at the forum, and they talked about that a little bit. But yeah, it's a big concern for North Carolina, is preserving farmland.
Yes. Are we losing a lot of farmland? Because we are having a lot of development. Lots of people are moving in.
Yeah. So we have the potential to lose thousands of acres of farmland within the next 10 years, I think by 2040.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think we're on tap the number 2 state in the nation that was rated as losing the most. Yeah, is losing the most acreage. And also, Troxler said there's other states who have really good preservation programs in place, but the reason they have them in place is because they've lost so much acreage already. So he doesn't want that to happen here, is what he told me.
Preservation programs make me nervous. That sounds like government.
Well, it's like a clean and green, so you can't develop it any longer. Yeah, it's actually is a good thing.
Right. I don't know. I worry about regulatory environments. What do you think?
Well, yeah, we have kind of threats to the acreage from a few different fronts. We have the solar initiatives where they're grabbing 40 or 50 acres of farmland to turn that into a solar field. But we also have kind of a problem you want to have as a state is we are growing so much. We have so many people moving here. And in some of our major metropolitan areas and their surrounding suburbs and small towns, the way that we're expanding is just where we're leading the nation in so many respects as far as the growth. And with that growth comes more housing, and with more housing comes less rural and agricultural land. And so I think they're looking at the threats there and figuring out what the best policies are going to be to actually mitigate the impact to farm production, but also actually be able to facilitate more and more housing and development so that we don't have this artificial scarcity and the sky-high prices that we deal with, where we've got want-to-be homeowners not able to afford homes because the supply is so low. So there's a balancing act here between all of the interests, and so it's going to be an interesting next 5 to 10 years for North Carolina to see where we end up and if we're able to actually absorb these kind of challenges.
Sure. What are your thoughts? What else did you find out in these stories?
Yeah, so Teresa, you're absolutely right. We are number 2 in the nation. I think Texas is the leading state for losing agricultural land. But Jeff, urban sprawl was one of the concerns that was talked about when it comes to farmland being at risk.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how North Carolina has shifted, because if we're having this urban sprawl, it's really changed our demographics, our urban-rural balance, and how people are voting, running their communities, what they're expecting from their government. This influx that North Carolina has experienced really has shifted who we are as a state. A little more technical, a little more blue in some areas. But what are your thoughts? What have you seen since you grew up here?
Yeah, I grew up in Carteret County. It's a relatively conservative place, and so on the coast of North Carolina. And very different than Orange County, in which I went to college. So we've had this diversity for a while, but I think it's become more and more accentuated as people gravitate towards those kind of like-minded areas. So if you're coming in from a different state and you want to live in more of the rural conservative areas, then maybe that's something you seek out. If you're coming from some of these states in the Northeast and maybe escaping some of the taxes and the mess and traffic, even though we have a fair share here, then you might gravitate towards a Charlotte or a Raleigh, Durham in the Triangle, and come here. But with that, you bring those values and those politics. So I think we're kind of sorting ourselves out. And so you've seen those blue ponds turn into to deep blue oceans and like around the triangle. And you've seen the surrounding red areas kind of maintain their character.
Sure.
As people move in.
Yeah, and people are going out to the suburbs and they're not really switching their politics. They're staying a little bit red.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about people from the Northeast moving to North Carolina or from California moving to North Carolina, and we assume that they'll bring California or New York politics with them.
Right.
But we often overlook is those people had an interest in leaving that state.
Sure.
Often that interest is because of the policies in that state making it so difficult to live and thrive there. And so they come here looking for an opportunity to do just that.
And yeah, I'm one of those.
Yeah. Exhibit A. Yeah.
Pennsylvania.
Sure.
You know, I came here for better job opportunities, better quality of life. But I will say Pennsylvania mirrors North Carolina. So you've got Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, like Charlotte and Raleigh. It's a big urban centers, a big blue.
Sure.
They kind of overrule what everybody else in the state, which is primarily red, and from the area that I'm from, I still have my conservative values. I still brought, so not everybody from the Northeast is, is liberal.
Sure.
But we, you know, a lot of us came here for a better quality of life.
Right,
And I
right.
mean, it's a great state to be in. And
Sure.
yeah, I agree.
Weather's definitely good.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and that speaks to like North Carolina as a microcosm of the nation overall, and we have the narrative about the cities and how the cities are run,
Sure.
and suburbia and more rural America, and we have all of those ingredients here in North Carolina. So
Right.
we can really learn a lot about national those big issues if we just pay attention to our own neighborhoods here in North Carolina.
Speaking of values, sometimes that sees a generational shift. Like when you look at how folks value what they value, I'm seeing a younger generation come up. They're not buying houses as quickly because sometimes they aren't able to. They're not getting married as young. Climate change, those issues are becoming a big one, not just for people on the far left like it used to be. It's becoming more moderate in a younger generation, like a religion. This is something you and I have talked about.
Yeah, and we often hear about how we're kind of losing our religion, how generationally church attendance and religiosity and self-identifying as a particular denomination, that those rates are going down, down, and down. But as
It's alarming to me.
Yeah, and I think as those rates go down, we assume that part of us is shrinking. But I think that that religious part is actually always extant. It's always there, and so it gets filled up with other things.
Right.
And so I think you see this reflected in how the younger generation may proclaim to be less religious, but they often act and behave even more religious when it comes to things like climate change or the green agenda.
So they've transferred that need to something else.
Yeah, so there's a lot of faith placed in some of these grand narratives about climate change and fighting for the environment, and so they put their emphasis on that. I mean, you can draw lots of parallels. There's lots of tithing toward the environmental movement, the cost that it comes down. And so I was looking just earlier, Pew Research Center has just really impressive rates for how many people across political spectrums support taking steps to become carbon neutral.
Okay.
By 2050, it's at 70%.
Oh, interesting.
So 70% is a really high number for that, and there is a big division among the parties. So it's about 40% for Republicans, and it's about 90% for Democrats. And so you see that divide. Younger people tend to be more liberal or left-leaning in their younger years, and so they match up with that, with their interest in the green movement as well. But I think that so much of this narrative has been accepted generationally as you come up. People my age often grew up with kind of doing good for the environment as being a top priority. You see them list it as a top priority as younger people, the older people not so much. And so then we accept that on faith and then make all of these quote-unquote investments towards those ends, and you can't really see tangible results for that. So as we all bend over backwards and pay through the nose for carbon neutrality initiatives, the data is really out as far as if that is actually going to have an effect on the stated ends that we want to achieve. But no one questions that as much. Even across political spectrums, there's just a quiet acceptance of that first premise that this is something we need to do.
Like this messaging worked 10,
and so,
15 years ago.
Yeah, and so someone can stop you in an argument and say, well, don't you believe in climate change? And it kind of reminds me of that question if you're having those sensitive kind of religious kind of debates or whatever, and it's like, well, don't you believe in God? And people would be taken aback, and you wouldn't want to step on the other side of that one, but it makes you wonder about that the kind of fullness of the acceptance of this conclusion that the climate is under dire threat, and that humans are just not long for this world with the current trajectory.
They
But
truly believe it. I mean,
they really think. I mean, and
Yeah.
you remember a few years ago, AOC got a lot of press for saying that the world was pretty much done in 12 years.
Right, right.
And that
that
12
was
years
about
is
12
about
years
all
ago.
we, yeah, it was about maybe about 12 years
This has
ago.
been going on for a while. They're like,
Yeah.
the world's coming in.
Yeah, and every
Sure.
time it comes around.
Sure.
Yeah. So the scientists that actually were behind that study that mentioned the 12 years part had to come out and clarify and say that's not exactly what we're saying. But you see the younger people have that fervor, and it feels like a religious fervor for this environmental movement.
Sure.
And so I was looking to maybe examine that
I
a
hope you
little
do,
bit
yes.
in print
Well,
this
I mean,
week.
'cause government isn't always the answer. There are very few more conservationists than in kind of rural hunters, fishermen, people who look to the environment and look to the natural world as God's gift to man, and to preserve it is our responsibility. That said, it means that government isn't necessarily the answer, and that's, I think, the message that gets lost sometimes on the left. That it often is to preserve, to protect, but also to look at this as a free market. There are free market solutions.
Yeah, I think you've had a lot of great people focusing on that end in these past few years to point out that the cleanest societies are often the ones that are able to become prosperous soonest, and that happens with free market policies. So the free market may in fact be the best approach towards actually achieving those ends, and in the meantime you don't have to saddle everybody with the regulations that really just stifle business and make everything more expensive, and energy less reliable for us here in North Carolina.
This is something we need to talk more about, I think. What are your thoughts, Katie?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. That, one thing the left is really good at is messaging. They're really good at messaging. And I think it's super interesting that, the younger generation is kind of replacing religion with some of these more, climate energy or some of these passions because of the messaging.
Right.
And yeah, it's very interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
I think so, particularly as they get older, raise children, families.
Well, people look for meaning even when we're young, and I think the younger generations maybe advertise that they're looking for meaning even more in whatever they do as far as their livelihoods and careers. But if that meaning isn't being fulfilled in all these other areas, and we've become less religious, and we've kind of changed over these past 30, 40, 50 years, then they're going to look for meaning, and you have that messaging to plug into. So if you think I can become part of saving the world by being for carbon neutrality by 2030 and putting windmills off the North Carolina coast, that makes me feel pretty good about myself. Now, when I grow up and realize how my power goes out a little bit more often now and my energy bill is more expensive, I might have second thoughts about exactly the approach I take to that end.
Very interesting. Good. I'm looking forward to seeing your column on this. Follow us for more. Go to carolinajournal.com and check in, because we've got a lot going on there. We're talking about a lot of the big picture issues, but also the nitty-gritty on regulatory environment, the impact on your business, and 2024 and what we can expect from the elections this year. Thanks so much, and we'll be right back at you with more information and more on carolinajournal.com.